Today I'm starting a new project. Our quilting guild has challenged us with a block of the month, and I like the block of the month because you learn to make different patterns, and it expands your horizons, and you know how to make and create different things. This time, the challenge is to use our scraps. That's right down my street. I've got all kinds of scraps here. So you need to have a certain amount of background fabric to make the quilt, and a number of scraps in order to make the different blocks. Now this pattern I just printed it off. The first month you get a printout of what the blocks are going to be, so you have an idea, and you get a bit of a description of how much you need for your background fabric and how much you need for your sashings and bindings. And I also got the instructions for this block right here, which is called a square of friendship. Now, when I got the instructions, the pattern is asking to make 5 blocks the same but in different colors. So I have to make 5 of these in different colors in order to follow the pattern. And each of the blocks are going to be 5 inches square. 5 inches square is just a bit bigger than this. And all of the pieces are going to be small little 1 inch, 1.5 inch pieces. And honestly, as soon as I saw the fact that you need to have 1 inch squares, my clunky fingers don't like to make those kinds of things. So I immediately thought, I've got to enlarge the blocks and make something that's going to be user-friendly to me. So I just had a good look at the this is just a bit of instruction that we got. And one of the pictures down at the bottom, which isn't very, very clear, but one of the pictures down at the bottom shows that there are going to be at least 72 blocks made over the course of the year. And so multiples of each one of those. And I just sort of went, oh, I don't think I can do that. So I'm going to enlarge the blocks. I'm going to make each one of them one time. And 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 12 altogether. So if I make the blocks in a bigger size, and I'm talking kind of big, I should be able to make 12 blocks, and that would be the whole front of a quilt. So in my world, I make things that are big, and I use my scraps anyway. So what I looked around for in the first place is a piece of fabric that has a lot of color. Oh, you can see it right here. It has a lot of color, and it has a big print. So instead of using white as my background, which a lot of this would suit in small scale, I'm using this as my background. And what I'm going to do is find some scraps that are big enough to make one block and use this piece of fabric in each of the blocks to unify them. So when I'm looking at my scraps to do something like that, I look in the bins that I have under my desk, and I come up with some things that I've got down below. So I've got a big strip of this polka dot pink, and I hold it up against the fabric and just see, do I like that with that piece of fabric? And the answer is definitely yes. So this piece of scrap is going to go into one of the blocks. Now, if you recall, a little while ago, I was making, I'll show you a picture of it I'll just edit it in. But I was making something from the bits and pieces of this that was already orphan blocks that somebody gave me. And I was just then taking them apart so I had bigger pieces, not ones that were already stitched in place. And the piece that I took out of here just happened to be quite a big size. So I thought, well, I can maybe use these. And I held that up against this fabric. And I also like that color with it. So this piece of pattern fabric here has got a whole lot of color in it, but it's a very good starting point as an inspiration to be able to use up scraps and to use a variety of colors. And frankly, I love having a lot of colors in my quilts. So since I'm starting something from scratch and not really using blocks that are already pre-cut, but I'm using bits of fabric that are not cut up, I'm going to go to town with this one and have a lot of fun. So with that in mind, and with, scraps in mind, I am just going to look through some fabric and pick out a bunch of colors that are in this fabric. And, normally on the selvage, there's a whole bunch of dots. This piece of fabric doesn't have that. So I'm going to have to, what I do is I put it up on my wall and I pin a whole bunch of pieces up with it, and then I take a photograph, and if the photograph looks good, well, then I'll save it, save that piece of fabric, and if it doesn't look so good with it, that one goes back into the bin. So I don't just trust my eye, I trust the lens of the camera too, and I think that's a good option. And since all the pieces are going to be quite big and bold, I think a lot of things are going to be useful in this. So just looking at the bin underneath here, I have two pieces like this. And I don't know exactly where they came from. And maybe, just maybe, it might turn into that quilt too, because in this part here, there's turquoises and there's orangey colors, and there's sort of some darker colors in there. So it might just make it in there. I'm not quite sure. I have to look at it. I spend some time with things on my wall, just in pieces added to things, and I look at them for a while, and then I decide whether or not I like it together. That makes sense. I don't just sort of go, whoop, that's a good one, let's use it. But I try to figure out if it's going to work for me. But definitely, I've got lots of things that are in sort of pinks, and they're not huge pieces, but they're big enough to be considered scraps, and they're big enough to do big blocks. So now that I've decided I'm going to do this and do big blocks, I have to do some maths. So once again, I'm just going to show you this picture. In the instructions that I got for those 1-inch strips to make 5 inches, I look at this and I see 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows, 5 rows, and 5 rows this way as well. So all I did, old school, I'm old school, I drew up a grid pattern that's 5 by 5, and it doesn't really matter what size you make these. I just made them the same, so they are even. And I decided that if I'm going to make 12 blocks, the easiest thing is on a quilt to put 3 across and 4 down, 4 across and 5 down. So since I have 12, 3 across, and 4 down is going to be the way to go. And if I'm making a big quilt, I'm going to make big squares. So my quilt is going to have 3 squares across, 4 squares down, and my squares are going to be 20 inches square. Finished. So 20.5 inches unfinished. So I'm taking this 5-inch pattern and just blowing it up so that it's going to be 20 inches when it's done. Kind of easy. So the first one, all I did was, in my little book here, I just X'd out the ones that are going to be the pattern. See? So I can count up how many I need. And since there's 5 rows, and I want it to be 20 inches when it's done, each row is 4 inches unfinished. So it will be 4 1/2 unfinished. Sorry, 4 1/2 unfinished, 4 finished, because you add the seam allowances around all 4 sides. So this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, that one are just going to be 4 1/2 inch squares. And these across here, I'm not going to cut them in individual squares. I can cut them as a length, and I won't have a seam there. But I can cut a strip of fabric that is 4 1/2 inches wide and then cut the lengths that I need, which is pretty easy. This is really an easy pattern to make bigger. Pretty good. So that's what I'm going to do. Just make my pattern bigger, and I just, on this side here, I just said how many pieces I need and how many pieces are going to be cut. Worked out really well. So every month I'm going to do one block, and by the end of the year I will have my quilt made. That's the biggest disappointment with block of the month. You want to get one pattern a year, but one pattern a month. You only get one pattern a month, and you have to wait all year to finish. That's not my style. I like to make things and finish them right away. But anyway, so the first one I'm making is going to have this fabric in it, and it's going to have the leftovers from this piece of scrap that I had in it. And as long as I have enough of those greeny pieces, I'll be away. So I've got to just work it out and sew it up. So in my 5.5-inch world here, I expanded the square so that it makes this 20 inches, 20.5 inches unfinished. So I've got seam allowances all along the outside. So each one of these rows across is 4.5 inches. 4, 4, 4, 4, 4 makes 20. 4, 4, 4, 4, 4 makes 20. So it's really quite easy to do things when they're in big pieces, and thread sticking out, and the pattern works like a charm. But I really don't have too much of this left over, and in fact, this one up here has a seam in it because I didn't have enough left over in a piece that was big enough to make one square. But it worked, and I'm happy with it. I'm happy with it. I still have some of these lime greeny ones that could go with another block. But anyway, I have one block finished, and now I'll just wait next month and start the second block. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.